How to get better grades in college. Where there's a will, there's an A.
Before the seminar, I was really burned out in school. I wasn't studying very effectively. I was studying hard and I was still getting poor grades. My GPA was 1.6. After the seminar, I learned how to study more effectively. My grade point average went all the way up to 3.0 and I anticipate 3.25 this semester.
My first 2 semesters at college were really awful. I did really bad in school and I was really frustrated. And I was really about to give up and just say I'll work at McDonald's the rest of my life. And then I was walking through campus and I saw a flyer about Dr. Olney's program on how to be an A student. And I was really skeptical at first because, you know, I've heard several times different ways that you can be a better student, and I just really didn't believe that it could be true. And then I went to this seminar. Now I went from a 1.0 or below 1.0 last semester, and I should have a 3.5 to a 4.0 this semester.
Before the seminar, I used to worry a lot and my test scores were pretty poor, but now everything's easy and my test scores have gone up. I've made a lot of improvement.
When I used to take tests, I used to get nervous, I'd get upset, and I'd really hate going into the testing area. And after I took the seminar, I found I would prepare better, I wouldn't get as nervous taking the test, and actually I ended up doing better on the test. Now I'm going into graduate school, and I feel that I'll be much more prepared and much more at ease taking tests and studying.
It's changed my life. Seminars changed my life.
You've just listened to some students that have taken my seminar, listened to my tapes, and begun to excel in school. They're no different than you are. If you listen to these techniques and apply them, you'll do just as well, maybe better. I appreciate that. I've gotten warm welcomes at other universities. I was recently in Chicago and cold back there. Went up to Milwaukee, visited with people from Marquette, Alverno, one of the top small colleges in the country. People even came over from Madison, from the University of Wisconsin. We had people driving up from Northwestern. Cold outside, but warm-hearted people, but it's always good to be back here at ASU. Let me just have you for a few moments picture yourselves in my shoes back about 6 or 7 years ago. Teaching at the university for many years, my 2 sons and daughter, always interested, of course, in going out here. We, in fact, went to the football games, and we'd go to basketball games, and we'd go to things at Grady Gamage. And then my first son applies, and now picture yourself teaching here, and he's turned down. Missed the upper half of his high school class. What would you do? Well, I did probably what you would have done. I rushed out, I bought all the books I could find on how to get good grades, how to study, how to take tests. I even went to some seminars like this. I went to a few expensive ones. I remember one was $295, Friday evening, all day Saturday. I went to a memory seminar, expensive. I can't remember how much it cost though, but it was expensive. There were a lot of good books, but boy, did I have to go through the books to pick out the little gems. I'd go through maybe a 250-page book just to find 1 or 2 good ideas. And the more I went to these seminars and the more I read, the more I realized that I had to tell my son something different than what most of them were telling their readers, and that was, you got to study hard. School isn't easy. It's going to take an awful lot of work. And I got that over and over again. Oh, they told me, for instance, I remember one seminar one evening, this young lady said, here's how you take a test. You make sure that you review it the night before. If you get stumped on a question, don't just sit there, move on. Get a good night's sleep. Don't stay up all night. These generalities, the kinds of things that your mothers say when you're leaving for a night out. She waves and says, take it easy or be careful. What they should really be doing, I think, is telling us every time we leave the house, maybe one pointer, one technique. Maybe a technique like this. If you're in a left turn lane, ready to turn left, keep the wheel straight ahead so that if you get hit from behind, you're not shoved into a head-on collision. Well, that's what we're going to do tonight. Instead of any of these generalities, I'm going to give you more techniques, more methods than you've probably heard in all your days at school. My attitude after going through these techniques and working on them over and over again, I found out more and more that you don't study hard, you don't have to study hard to do well in school. The only thing you have to do is study smart. And if you do, you're going to have records like students right here at ASU. I'm thinking of, for instance, one of the first students that took my seminar about 2 or 3 years ago, Jay Russell, won the Outstanding Student Award last year at our honors convocation in the College of Business. 24 straight A's in a row, 5 semesters of straight A's after taking the seminar, and over again, people that have proven that you don't have to study hard, you simply have to study smart. Tonight it's going to be kind of like a little magic show. Remember when you were small and you showed your friends a little trick? For instance, I used to like to do this on my friends. What I'm doing, if you listen to this on cassette tapes, is I'm bending one finger and my thumb and giving the illusion that my thumb or finger is coming off. What's the first question your friend asks you when you do something like this? That's it. How'd you do that? And what do you tell them? You bend your hand, you bend your finger, you bend your thumb, and you do this, and then when you show them how it's done, what do they always say? I could have done that. And a lot of these things tonight are going to be like that. You're going to walk away and you're going to maybe say, well, I could have done that. What would your friends think if they came over to your house and sat down in your living room and your dog walked up to the door and turned the knob with its teeth and went outside? Brilliant dog. What would they have thought had they been there a week earlier and before you'd shown them that technique and your dog scratched at that door for an hour as long as they were there? Dumb dog. But it's the same dog. All we do is teach the dog a technique, and suddenly it's a brilliant dog. That simple trick is going to both save time and energy. Why doesn't the dog know enough to stop scratching? It honestly believes that it's going to get through the door. Otherwise, it would quit. Oh, yes. How did my first son do? Well, he made the dean's list every year at ASU. This is a student now that was initially turned down right here. He graduated with honors. He was chosen in the physics department to assist there in his senior year. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the other people as we go along. Let's just listen for a moment to a former student by the name of Charles Pengrassi and how he turned his situation around.
Before Professor Olney's seminar, I flunked out of school. after professor-only seminar, I've had 19 straight A's and not one B.
That brief clip that you saw or listened to was made a month ago. Since then, Charles Vingrassi has turned in another straight A semester right here at ASU. Now, here we go with our first of 20 techniques. First of all, I suggest copying big business. College is big business. Big business follows standard methods. A builder of houses, for instance, uses mirrors and scaled-down furniture in model homes. A car dealer spends all kinds of money on lights and detailing the outside of their automobiles that they're trying to sell. All successful big businesses spend big money on advertising and beautiful stationery, on letters that are picture perfect. Well, school is big business too. And we can do the same things to make a good impression, because is appearance important? More so than I ever believed. An acquaintance of mine who had a professor back at Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois, told me this little story. One day, the professor took home a stack of blue books with essay exam answers in them, and just for the fun of it, he asked his wife, who had beautiful penmanship, if she'd rewrite 4 or 5 of these sloppiest of blue books, the kind that have crossed out words and phrases, arrows to other pages, poor erasures. Here's one with a couple of comments in the margin. You've maybe seen blue books like that. Here's what the professor did then. He put fictitious names on those half a dozen newly written, beautifully done blue books that his wife did for him, and slipped them back into this stack and took them back to his TAs. Of course, they didn't know what he was up to. And he asked them to grade those. He was amazed to find out that the sloppily written blue books, on average, got a C. But the blue books that had been neatly rewritten, without changing a single word, on average, got an A grade. Now, that's maybe not how things should be in life, but that's how it is. And big business doesn't fight it. If it takes 100 lights out on a parking lot, on a used car lot, with a big electric bill to sell cars, they're going to do it. At Rider College, back on the East Coast, they did a larger survey. There were several hundred papers. And a student project, they took half typed term papers and half term papers that were done on word processors. Do you know what happened on those two? You'd think that it would just be an infinitesimal difference, if any. And yet, according to the statistics, the word processor papers received, on average, a 3.1, which is about a little bit better than a B. The typed papers, on average, receive a 2.6, or just a little better than a middle C. Not one of the word processor papers got an E. Several of the typed papers did. Now, why the difference? These students that conducted the survey weren't quite sure, but here's what they felt was the difference. First of all, the word processor papers overall looked neater. There were no whiteouts. They also seemed to have fewer typos, and they seemed to be constructed a little bit nicer. Now, why would that happen? I think it's because if I were to write a paper type it out, maybe 6 or 8 or 10 pages, and go back to review it and find very slight errors, I think I'd be inclined to do nothing about it. I don't know if I would revise a fairly neat paper either. But you see, with a word processor, you punch a few buttons and you can do the whole thing. And you can also justify the right margins. Some instructors may not want that, or at least they tell you they don't want it, but subconsciously, if it looks better, they'll want it. You know, we can do crazy things with our mind. And we're going to look into some of the logical things that we can do with our mind today, too. Let me get back to the Northwestern papers for a moment. How can you turn in better quality exam papers? A real simple technique. Do any of you have an erasable pen? Do you have one? Can you catch? Beautiful. Can you catch? Beautiful. Can you? Beautiful. You know, it's strange, but most of the people, when I started giving this seminar, I thought that there were going to be a lot of average and below average students at my seminars. Do you know what? It doesn't work that way. The people that are interested in being more successful are already pretty successful themselves. So if you look around here and you see people that were in the class that seem to be in the upper end of the class, don't be surprised, because I found that happen. Did you get a pen? That's about what, 4 for 4? Ooh, almost. How about this? Can I get it to the second row? It's kind of difficult to get to the second row. That's going to be another point. The people in the first row get more attention than people in the second row on back. That doesn't seem to be fair either, but that's how life is. We're not on a fair planet. That planet is off someplace else. Now, what do you do with an essay exam if you now use a pen that is an erasable pen? Now, if you make a mistake, you see you can erase it. And have you tried it yet? Give it a whirl, see how it works. Just write down a mistake and then erase it. You see the difference? If you turn in a blue book that has no crossed out words, it's going to look like your first rough draft was your final draft. It's just simply going to look better than anybody else's. And whether you like it this way or not, everything seems to be a comparison. If yours stands out, you're going to get the breaks. Let me give you another example of how the brain works. I saw a show on PBS some time ago, and it was I caught the end of it, so I didn't get the whole gist of it, but it went something like this. There was a owner-trainer of elephants, and there was this huge elephant tied to a stake with a little tiny rope about the size of a clothesline. And do you know how he explained it? Why that huge elephant didn't try to break away from this little rope that it obviously could break if it wanted to. He said when the elephant was little, they tied it to the same rope. And that little baby elephant tugged and tugged at this rope, and finally, after a few weeks, it gave up. And as the elephant grew, it never tried again. And now you've got this huge elephant that you can contain with a little rope. That's what you can do with your mind. We can do the same thing. My wife, years ago, taught at Tonellia School over in Scottsdale when we were first married. She started in the middle of the semester and took over for another teacher that was having a baby. She went into this class, of these little tots in the first grade and found them segregated into 3 reading groups: the red group, the white group, and the blue group. The red group, poor readers. The white group, mediocre to fair readers. And the blue group, of course, the good readers. Here's what she did. She felt bad for the little ones that were in the red group. And so what she started to do was to gradually move people around. And she made the white group a little bit bigger and the red group a little bit smaller and the blue group a little bit bigger, and pretty soon, after a few weeks, there was only one group, and it was a blue group, and everyone in the blue group read at the same pace. Okay, let me give you an example again of how we can apply some of the techniques of big business right here in college. I've got a friend by the name of Austin. He retired and decided that he couldn't just sit around. He was bursting with energy. Played tennis with him, sold his business. He said, "You know, I'd like to teach like you're doing." And I said, "Why don't you do it?" And he says, "Well, I don't know. I haven't been back to school for so many years, and I don't really have the time. I'm training this fellow to go into my business, and it's taking a lot of time." And I said, "Well, go ahead and do it anyway. You can do it." Well, I saw him again shortly afterwards, and he had gone and taken a very tough course that he needed. I said, "How's it going?" He says, "It's great. I'm going to get the highest grade in the class." And I said, "How do you do it?" He said, "It is so easy, you won't believe it. First of all, I felt intimidated because everyone was so young in that class. Here's what I did. I did the same thing I did in my businesses. I played tapes during the day. If I'm driving around someplace, I put a cassette in. And what I did was, when I was at home, I would read my material into my cassette player, and then on the way to school, I would put it in the car and I'd listen to myself on the way to school. Then I'd take notes in class, and sometimes I'd even tape the class, and then on the way home, I'd plug it in again. I'd get this material by, first of all, seeing it on the paper, talking out loud, hearing myself, sitting in class and hearing it again on the way home. He says, that's all I had to do. I got the top grade in the class. I don't know why everyone else doesn't think of something so easy. If you come to a seminar like this, how much do you think you retain when you leave? The average person, it said, that goes to a half-day seminar will be lucky to retain 40% even the day after, and begins to lose more and more after that. So I recommend that you go over these things. If you have them on tapes, whether on video or audio, go over these. Go over them every semester at least once. And then your recall will gradually rise up into the 90, 95, even 100% range. And it's so easy because it's effortless to watch or to listen. I've got a friend by the name of Jim Rohn, goes around the world, trains upper management people. I asked him one time how he handled his motivational talks. He says, "Oh, wait a minute. I don't do motivational talks. I'm not a motivational speaker." He said that if you took an idiot and gave him no techniques or no knowledge, if you just motivated him, what would you end up with? He said all you do is end up with a motivated idiot. And you know, there's some truth to that. And maybe that's what happened to me with some of the seminars and books. They were motivational, but I didn't have techniques. Let me give you another example of a student that was in my class right about the first year or two that I was teaching. He was in a group called the Gringos. It was a little orchestra. He was a trumpet player. Sat in the front of my business law class. I was chairman of the honors committee that year, and he happened to be in it. So I got to know him a little bit more than the rest of the people in the class. And I asked him one day, what's your secret to success? And he said, well, I've got a wife and a child, and I'm carrying 18 hours, and I spend about 40, 50, 60 hours a week with my orchestra. I said, boy, how do you do it? You must be brilliant. Oh, no, he said, if I were brilliant, I wouldn't have to come up with these special techniques that I use. You see, I made the mistake back then of jumping to the conclusion that the guy has just got natural ability. Have you done that with friends or acquaintances where they can hit a golf ball real well? Or you take someone like Magic Johnson or Larry Bird and you say, well, they just got natural ability. Do you ever hear about those fellows and how much practicing they do to get that natural ability? I said, can you tell me what techniques you use then? And he said, well, one thing I learned early, and that was to throw away my yellow marker. I said, why? Why would you do that? How do you mark the important things in your book without a yellow marker? He said, that is one of the misconceptions that I got rid of very early. I have a limited amount of time. I'm flying around, and so here's what I did. And he showed me some pages out of his business law book. Do you know how big a business law book is? Here is the business law book, the size of the one that they used to use. Fortunately, ours are a little smaller now. Can you imagine carrying this around on the airplane? So here's what he did. He said, instead of marking everything down in yellow, which is really a deceptive practice on my mind, because what I'm really doing when I mark things in yellow is putting off learning it until a later date. Isn't that what you're really doing if you use a yellow marker? You're putting it off until later. You're saying, I'll go through this later. I said, well, what do you do in place of it? He said, when I go through the book, the only thing I do is I mark the things I don't know. Whether they're important or not, I simply mark a little mark in the margin. Then I cut those pages out, and he says, I make enough money with the orchestra so I can afford to, I paid for the book, so I can afford to cut these pages out, and I put this in my trumpet case, and when I'm on a plane someplace, I go through this and I go over that. And after about 5 or 6 times, I found that then I know it. It's gone from my short-term memory to my long-term memory. Then he said, when I'm sure that I know it, then I cross out my little mark. I said, what do you do for reviewing? He says, review what? I don't have to review anything. And he turned to me and he said, do you mark your car manual in your glove compartment in yellow? All the important things, how to start the car, how to turn on the air conditioning, how to run the radio. I said, no. He says, do you review it before you go on a big trip? I says, no, why would I? I know it already. He said, that's just exactly what I mean. Why would I review before a test if I already know it? Another student came up with something very similar. Young man in my class last semester in the roofing business. He uses 3x5 index cards. He found out during his busy day, he has 12 employees. Some of you may know him, John Coates, in business. He runs around during the day, pulls out his index cards. He said, after 5 or 6 times, these facts went from his short-term to his long-term memory. He didn't use those terms, but that's what he meant. Let's try a little experiment now that an English psychologist, Tony Besson, wrote about in his book, Make the Most of Your Mind. I'm going to give you a few numbers. Don't write them down, but just think about them. And we'll see how we come out on this. Here they are. 3, 18, 30, 85, 24, 38, 6, 42, and 7. Can anyone tell me what the middle number is? Just shout it out if you know it. 85, someone said. Someone said 19. 85 is one of the numbers. 19's not even here. I'm glad you're here. What? 24. That's it. Can anyone remember the first number? Can anyone remember this last number? Isn't that weird? How do you account for that? Well, Tony Bassan accounted for it. He found out that we can recall the first and the last facts, numbers, words, whatever, the best. Now, if that's true, and we've proven it here, what if you were to study things in short bursts, maybe in 5-minute segments? Now you're going to have a first and last, a second first and last, a third, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth in a half hour. That's 12 first and last facts, as opposed to someone else that studies for an entire hour who has only 2 first and last facts. What a beautiful way of accelerating learning. He also discovered this. Wow, where did this chalk come from? Growing out of these plants. Here's about what happens. In our 1-hour period, our concentration up at the beginning is high. That's why we remembered number 3. And our concentration at the very end for 7 is also high. But this middle area, we fall down. And what if we were to cut out this middle, inefficient area of study? We would now have high concentration for this first 5 or 10 minutes. And if we have 5 or 10 minute segments, and we continue to do that, we're way up in our concentration area. And that's why we can save time. He found out a third element, that if we do this with breaks in between, we're even going to have better recall, because that's how our mind works. Sit down for a few minutes, carry the card around, like our student roofing contractor, and go through the day. And my student found out, and the trumpet player found out, that it takes about 5 or 6 or 7 times on different occasions for facts to go from our short-term to long-term memory. Imagine the time saved. You know, a lot of people deceive themselves into thinking that if they sit in the library for 2 hours, they deserve a grade. But you don't get a grade for sitting in the library. And you don't get a grade for putting in long hours at home. And you don't get a grade for studying hard. The only thing I ever give a grade for are the right answers. But you see, we're deceiving our mind. We're doing what the elephant is doing. And it's sometimes because everyone else is using a yellow marker, so we think that's the way you study. I like to use the example of the 2 people that are cutting a tree down. I'll give this young lady a sharp axe. I'll give this nice, husky young man a sledgehammer. And I'm still willing to bet that she'll be able to get a tree down in less time than he will. So it's a matter of using the right tools. He'll put a lot of time and effort in, but she'll get the result. At Penn State, there was a study. Hard work, here's the headline, hard work had little relation to top grades. More important than hard work was number 1, attendance, and number 2, sitting in the front row. We'll talk about attendance later, but right now, why does a person sitting in the front row have a better chance at a higher grade? Well, if we were taking a test in here tonight, and there was an ambiguous question that came up, it would be so easy for someone in the front row to just motion to me and have me come over and explain it. But how many of you way in the back in the middle would get up out of your seats, have everyone move, come down the center aisle in front of this large group, and ask me the question? It's easier in the front row to pay attention to what's going on up here. There are fewer and fewer distractions. You people way in the back may go out of here knowing all of the hairdos and all of the shirts and the blouses that everyone's wearing, but you see the people in the front row have a better chance at going out with material. It's easier to concentrate when you're up close. A cat 2 feet away from a mouse will have a much better chance. In fact, let's try something from the same book on concentration. Everyone, just for a moment or two, just lean forward. Pretend you're a cat. Pretend you're a tiger. Lean into everything, ears picking up the slightest sound, eyes glued to this piece of chalk, and listen. Did you hear that? Do you see how easy it is to concentrate on something when you're crouched forward like a tiger? Do you think a tiger 50 feet away in the back of a classroom would have the same success rate as one that's sitting right up in the front? You can sit back now. This happens every seminar. The first time I tried this, people were crouched forward for 20 minutes before I suddenly realized everyone is leaning forward. Okay, that's big business. Did you know that college is worth about $600,000 more over a person's lifetime? You can add $600,000 to your lifetime earnings. That's $150,000 a year for going to college. That's $75,000 a semester, $5,000 a week, $1,000 a day for sitting in a classroom. More than if you weren't there. That's big business. I often wonder what a person does that misses a day here and there. Do they make up that $1,000? Because that's what they're actually giving away. Now, here's the second technique for getting top grades. Choose what you like. You'll do much better at subjects that you like. My second son, star athlete, ACT score of 11. Do you know what an 11 is? ASU requires a 21 or 23 if you're from out of state. So now what? He's turned down. I filed a petition. I'm getting good at it by now. I get letters. Well, the first letter I got says this: in reviewing your application for admission and your high school transcripts, we find that you rank in the lower half of your high school class. Goes on to say, if you want to appeal, fine. Well, we filed an appeal and he got in. By then, we were up to many more techniques. We had been working now for a whole year on these. Look at this interesting letter. The registrar's office has informed me that your grades have qualified you for the current honors list. This is a great achievement, and I wish to congratulate you. Your record to date, 3.8 cumulative average, qualifies you for admissions, etc. Please accept our best wishes, continued success in your academic endeavors, signed by the director of the honors program. Imagine how I felt when I got that letter. When he came home, now again, picture this. He's 17 years old, comes out to ASU, registers in liberal arts, comes home. He hadn't done very well in language in high school. I said, what'd you pick as your language? He said, Russian. I said, what? Russian? He said, yeah, it sounds kind of intriguing. Oh boy, I thought, yes, it might be intriguing. Well, here are his grades that first year. 6 A's, including an A in Russian. So if any of you feel that maybe you're not able to do it, consider some of the people that are doing it. Oh, look at this. Here is, I'll hold up for you, a certificate with a gold seal on it. It says, James W. Alney has achieved a grade point average of 4 point and is named to the Dean's List of Outstanding Scholars for that semester, signed by the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. Can you imagine how proud I was? This young fellow that they said doesn't belong here comes home with a 4-point average. My heart was bursting with pride. I rushed out and got the best frame I could down at Kmart. And I put this thing in that frame. I took it out now because as he went along, here's another one, and he just kept getting it. He graduated last year. His final short semester, he had straight A's. So it's kind of exciting. I think there's a point to it, too. Don't let hard courses fool you. Take it on. Go for it. You'll maybe be very happy if you do. Now, what does a B mean? Because maybe for some of us, a B is an important grade. Well, it means getting into graduate school. I found out it meant lower insurance rates. 3 children not on the Dean's List, not getting a B average, and suddenly all 3 of them are doing it. It means better jobs. Civil service pays up to $5,000 more a year in certain areas if you do better just in math. It means scholarships. $4 billion were given away last year in scholarships in this country. There was such a large amount left over, 136 million. It seemed there was more money than students. It also means peace of mind. But what it really meant for my children, and I could see it, is satisfaction of being extremely successful after average, mediocre high school grades. Okay, now what does an A mean? Because that's why we're here tonight. We're going to shoot for an A in here. First of all, it does not mean perfection. You do not have to get 100% to get an A. In baseball, if you can hit 1 time out of 3, you'll be very successful any team you play with. Vince Lombardi, one of the perfectionists in professional football, Green Bay Packer coach, said in a lecture to his players one time, you know, perfection is not attainable, and I don't expect it of anyone, but I do expect excellence. In our manual, our 3rd point is to check out professors and courses. Do you know what the average student spends in checking out a blind date? 3 minutes. Do you know how much time is spent? And how long is a blind date? 3-4 hours? On the other hand, how much do you think the average student spends checking out a professor where there's 3 or 4 months involved? Practically none. Most students don't check out instructors. A good instructor, an excellent instructor, can make any course interesting and fun, but a poor instructor can ruin a good course. So, my suggestion is pick good instructors. Better to be in a class with a good instructor in a poor course because he or she may make it good, make it interesting. You don't want to be in a class like this. Student goes into the professor and says, did I miss anything important yesterday? What kind of question is that? What does he expect the instructor to say? No, it's a terrible class. In fact, tomorrow it's going to be worse. I suggest you don't come. You can petition to substitute required courses. In fact, you can even take courses at other schools. If you run into one that you think is going to really be tough, what if you were to take a course at a different university, let's say over the summer, maybe a science or math course, and you're maybe weak in that? How does that transfer over? Well, it generally transfers just as a 3 or 4 credit number. And the grade, A, B, or C, doesn't transfer in. My son did that. He didn't feel real good about math and science, so he took one of his math courses, one of his science courses at another college in the summer. He ended up getting a C or a B in it. But even a B would have lowered his average. So you see, he maintained his high average here. Audit difficult courses. Talked to a young man the other evening that is in pre-med, auditing organic chemistry, one of the critical courses to get into medical school. Also a very difficult course. Now you audit the course, you take all the notes, you see, you take the tests, you practice it, and then the next semester you take it for credit. What are the chances of getting an A then? Oh, how would you like to be in this class? A young lady wrote to me from some college back east, and she said, you know, your course really saved me from a big problem. I read about a physics course. There were something like 100 and some students in that course, and there were only 2 or 3 A's, 4 or 5 B's, several dozen C's, and everyone else got a D or an E. Wouldn't that be a disastrous course to find yourself in? So the thing to do is to check out courses and instructors at least for 3 minutes. Now, how do you check them out? You can start a file box, as my 3 children did. They had over 700 cards in a file box, little 3x5s in a little metal box. Every time they saw someone in the student union or on the bus or before or after class, they pulled a card out that had all of the subjects that they were interested in taking on the card. Anthro, art, architecture, communications, criminal justice, education, English, geography, health, humanities, history, music, on, psychology, sociology, marketing, finance, accounting, real estate, insurance. And then they had a second card, and on it it said course and then instructor. Here's how this works. If you just go up to someone and ask, do you know of any good or bad teachers? They'll say, well, I don't know. See, that's another general question. You've got to be specific. Do you know anyone in anthropology? No. How about art? No. Oh, wait a minute. How about English, geography, health? They'll find one. You write it down. Now you start sharing this information with other people, and suddenly you've got a big card file. That's how big business does it. You can look at courses. You can go to the bookstore and sometimes use books. I don't know if they do this anymore, but I'm sure that in other universities and colleges around the country they do. You get a used book and you call a person up, if their name or telephone number is in there, and you ask them, how did you like the course? Who did you have? You can stand outside a classroom this semester and ask students either going into the class or coming out of the class about a certain instructor that you're interested in next semester. Valuable information. You know, it's easy to make up excuses. Easy courses or hard courses or instructors. This son that took Russian, when he came home, he also told me that there was a major, an Air Force major, sitting in the Russian class. We've got a good, strong Russian curriculum here at ASU. People come from all over. They're sent in. One of the professors wrote the book that's used around the United States. James had Lee Croft. James could hardly wait to get to class on Monday morning. Lee Croft made that course so exciting. He was named Outstanding Professor of the Year here at ASU. What have we got, over 1,000 professors? That's the kind of professor to get. Get someone that's so exciting, you could take any language from him. Well, anyway, he still feels a little intimidated about this major, a 17-year-old sitting next to this 35 or 40-year-old major. Well, about 3 or 4 weeks into the semester, I was walking down the mall out here, past the Language and Literature building, and he came out with the major walking next to him. And of course, I knew who he was, and I went up to him, and he introduced me to him. And I said, how do you like it out here in Phoenix? And he said, I like everything except one thing. I say, what's that? He said, your son is so intimidating. I said, why? He's getting A's in here, and I've got to keep up with a 17-year-old. Do you see how you could turn it either way you wanted? The major is either old and bright, or this 17-year-old is young and bright. They're intimidating to each other, but it's in the mind. It's only because what we think.
This concludes Session 1 of Where There's a Will, There's an A. Session 2 will begin in a moment.
Number 4, read your textbooks early. Why would this help? Well, there are a few advantages, besides the obvious getting a head start on everybody else. Well, you might get sick. You might have 3 tests in one day. You might have family affairs. You get burned out towards the end of the semester. Activities come up. Here's another reason, though, a student gave me the other day. He said, I've got a couple of professors that follow the book. And he said, if I read before class, I find out that I can just sit there and follow along. I know just where he is. And I'll mark the book every once in a while or put down a note. And I look around, and everyone else is writing like mad. And what are they writing? They're writing what the professor is reading to them out of the book. What a waste. Here's another good reason for reading books early. A chemistry book is not very interesting along towards the end of the semester when you're not feeling good. My daughter found that out. She bought one of her books, a chemistry book, in midsummer and started reading it. She said, gee, this is kind of an interesting book. Towards the end of that semester, she made an unusual observation. She says, this chemistry book is not the same book I was reading last summer. It is not that interesting. What do you do towards the end of a semester when you start getting that burned out feeling and you need another hour or so to study? There's a couple of things that you can do for your brain. Here's a short 3-step approach. First of all, prop up your feet. Now, if you're driving a car and listening to this, don't do this till you get home. You get them up about head high. The blood then will flow easier to your brain. It's because fatigue causes a slow flow of blood to your brain. And we don't think straight when that happens. So this gives it an opportunity to ease its way out. Second, start breathing deeply. What does that do? Well, this gets oxygen into the blood that we lose by shallow breathing. And third, eat just a little bit of something sweet because our blood sugar level drops when we're tired. That simple little 3-step method will rejuvenate your brain for anywhere between an hour and 2 hours on those tough days. And that's really the longest we ought to study anyway because of our reversed bell-shaped curve up here. Another thing that we ought to consider before studying or taking exams is not eating a big heavy meal because in other studies the blood supply goes to the stomach to help in digestion and it gets away from the brain where we need it and we're not going to think as clearly. Our brain has got 2 different sides to it. I'm sure that most of us are familiar with the 2 hemispheres. The right side is the visual side, the left side is the verbal. What if you were able to use both sides instead of concentrating on just one, as many of us do? If you read aloud, for instance, into a tape recorder and listened later like Austin, now you're beginning to use both sides. You're getting the visual side and the verbal side. Try this little right brain, left brain test. I'm going to draw 9 dots in the shape of a square, and I'd like to have you draw 4 straight lines without raising your pen or pencil, and cover all those dots. And I'll show you the solution in a moment if you don't already know it, because I know that some of you people have seen this before. Einstein was both a right and left brain thinker, and yet he couldn't read until he was 7. And in fact, he got thrown out of high school. But he came up with a theory that revolutionized science, the theory of relativity. And he did it because of using both sides of his brain. He was on a train, and he noticed that when the buildings went flashing by the window, they seemed to get narrower. And then he was sitting on a hillside one day, and he looked up into a bright sky, and he squinted, and he could see these little specks flying around, and he got these wild ideas. Went back to his desk, applied his left brain logical side, and came up with this theory. Later, he admitted he would never have come up with the theory of relativity had he simply used scientific logical thinking, because that theory at the time was contrary to all scientific doctrine. When you do read a book, when you do study, take minimum notes, abbreviate everything. You know, we don't think in sentences. Can you remember a single solitary 10 or 12 word sentence from your entire lifetime? We don't think that way. We think in little key ideas. That's the way we ought to take notes. So don't waste time and effort with sentences in your notebook. They only belong in essay exams. There's only 2 parts of our body that we can actually develop. You can't make your hair grow faster or thicker. You can't do much about making your bones grow differently. But you can do something about your muscles and your brain. Those are the 2 that can be developed. See, let's try a little experiment again. Everyone just kind of fold your fingers, hands together like this so that your thumbs are on top. And now look down at your thumbs, and which thumb is on top? It's said by many psychologists that if your right thumb is on top, you're right-brained. If your left thumb is on top, you're left-brained. If you're one of the 15% left-handers, then just reverse that. That's maybe not too scientific, but here are some ways of determining whether you're right or left-brained. Do you feel uncomfortable if your checkbook doesn't balance? Nodding yes back there. Those types would make good accountants. Also doctors, scientists, engineers, mathematicians, people that are analytical, logical, and mechanical are typical left brain oriented. The right brain person, on the other hand, is the musical type, the artist, the theatrical person, the entrepreneur, the innovative, creative, the kind that can't sit still in a library for more than about an hour, if that. The problem with the right brain person is schools are set up for left brain students. It caters towards left brain people that like to do research, like to sit in the library hour on end. Oh, and then you've got a few people right in the middle. Writers, architects. An architect is someone that uses artistic skills and mathematical and engineering skills. How can you develop if you find yourself too far off in any one of these 2 areas of your brain? One of the simplest ways of doing it is simply take courses in the other sphere area. For instance, if you're an engineer or an accountant, take some courses in music or art. If you're an entrepreneurial person, or if you are a musician or artist, and you think that you're too much of a daydreamer, and you need something more in your life, rigidity, then take some of the courses in accounting or science. Okay, let's look at our little puzzle here, our little diagram, the left brain problem. Here's how a left brain person attempts to solve this problem. They do it in a very logical fashion. They see a square. I'm just kind of filling in the square on the board. And then they try to figure out, how can I get these lines to cover all the dots without lifting the pen? They'll never do it, because in order to solve this puzzle, you've got to use your right brain. You've got to be creative. You've got to look outside of things. You can't take a narrow view. And so the right brain person goes outside of himself, out into a never-never land, and is able to come back and solve this puzzle without lifting the chalk, and he does it in 4 lines. That's the difference between right and left brain thinking. Now, how can we apply that in school? Well, if you have a left brain professor, that professor will listen more to logic. The right brain professor, on the other hand, will listen to negotiations. He'll listen to something that's creative, innovative. Let's take 2 examples. We've got 2 exam questions. A law graduate found a case in his favor on the bar exam. Now, lawyers are typically left-brained. They're analytical thinkers. How do you get that changed? By bringing in concrete evidence that there's another possibility, because here is the case. It's logical, it's rational, and it's right there. How does the right brain person, handle the right brain professor? The right brain professor that's willing to negotiate, is a little flexible. Well, I had a lifeguard in my class last year. He had 39 A's and 1 B. What do you think the B was in? Swimming. He took a 1-credit course. Can you imagine graduating from ASU with 39 A's and 1 B, and you're a lifeguard during the summer and you get a B in swimming? I told him, I said, why don't you approach your professor and see if you can get that thing changed? He says, I don't want to crawl around. He was one of these athletic-looking guys, and he says, I'm not going to crawl up and beg for a grade. But he told me later on that he did reconsider my suggestion. And you know what he did? He went in with this creative, innovative, bargaining method. He got his transcript, and he went into the swimming instructor's office, and he laid it down on his desk, and he said, what would you do if you were me? And the instructor looked at these grades, and he says, boy, oh boy, you got all these A's. Oh, what's this? A B in swimming. Did I do that? He said, let me look at my grade book again. He looked at his grade book, and he said, you know what, you got the best grade in the class, but I don't know about if you should get a B in something like swimming. But maybe I'm wrong. Let me consider it. And he considered it and changed the grade. Do you know, for 10 years, I've been, at night, I turn the thermostat down in the winter, and then I have to get up in the morning and it's cold, and I turn it back up again. Left brain would tell me this: call up and find out how much one of those turn-down thermostats cost. I called someone about 3 days ago. They said I thought it would be maybe $100 maximum. They said for a good one, it's $200 installed. I thought, I'm not going to spend $200. I'll just keep getting up, back and forth. Then my right brain moved into action. Do you know what I did? I bought this little gadget. I'm holding up a little night light, an automatic night light that turns on when it gets dark. Now, what do you think that does? I plug it in near the thermostat, and at night when it gets dark, this turns on, it heats the thermostat, and now the thermostat regulates the temperature, and it starts going down. And then in the morning when the light goes on, I don't have to get up because this light goes off. And now it gets cool, and the thermostat tells the heating system to go back on. $3.95. That's right brain thinking. You can do that. The brain, like the muscles, likes activity. When you read for enjoyment, I suggest reading passively. Just sit and read and go through it and enjoy it. But when you're reading to study, do it actively. And here's how you actively read and study. You have a pen or pencil in your hand, And as you're reading the material, write down questions and answers. Practice taking tests. You'd be amazed at how your grades will change because you're going to come up with many questions that are on the next exam because that's what your instructor is going to do. He's going to read the material and write down test questions. Now, number 5, the 2-week massive attack. I suggest this for the people who are competitive. My son, the athlete, is a competitive type, and for him this is great. The 2-week massive attack. What is it? You go like crazy for about 2 weeks, and then you level off at a real easy pace. There's only one problem with that. It's hard to relax and ease off after the first 2 weeks. So if you try this method, now what's going to happen if you give it 125 or 150% effort the first couple of weeks? You're going to excel. That's what he did. He was getting top grades in his Russian classes, in his history classes, in his English classes, no matter what he took on. He excelled, and it was difficult. There's a difference between successful people and unsuccessful people. Successful people typically handle a project that you give them like this. They say to themselves, I'll give it 3 months or 6 months. If it doesn't work, I'll quit and admit defeat. The successful person takes on a project and says mentally to himself or herself, I'm going to take on this project and I'm going to make it work. There are no excuses. There are no conditions. That's why mothers fit into the successful bracket when they train their children to walk. You try this sometime. Go up to a young mother with a young child that's still crawling and ask that mother, say, young mother, how long are you going to spend teaching that little kid to walk? She'll say, I'm going to spend as much time as it takes. If it takes me 5 years, I'm going to keep at it. Look at the proof. We're all walking. All our mothers took that attitude. If we took the mother attitude towards our studying, there's no wonder what we could do. I had a friend that I sold door-to-door with in Milwaukee years ago. He had lost his arm in an accident. I was ready to throw in the towel. I was trying to sell furnaces door-to-door in Milwaukee in the summertime. I was no, one after another. One day, he was a little late. He had this old Ford, stick shift Ford, I remember. I'm going up to this corner house, and I hear this beeping, and of course I know who it is. He's coming around the corner. He's shifting, he's waving, he's beeping, he's steering, all with one arm. I thought to myself, how does he do that? I decided right then and there, I'm not going to quit. If he can handle that kind of a thing, I can work and try to find us. You know what happened? The very next house I went up to, I didn't sell anything. You know what happened the rest of the day? I didn't sell anything. But you know what happened a few days later? I sold a furnace. And that was the beginning of selling furnaces. Had I not had someone tell me or given me that inspiration, I would have quit. I was ready to throw in the towel. It was hot and sweaty back there, and I was getting no's. Now, number 6, 0 absences. Taking into account that study at Penn State where attendance was considered as one of the most important methods of getting good grades, I went back through all of my records and I took 800 students in my business law classes here at ASU. I took about half A students and half C students, and I checked their attendance. I don't do that anymore. We've got such large classes. We've got 250 or so in a class now. But back then, when it was manageable, I could take attendance. And do you know that the A students missed on average only half a class a semester, and the C students missed 4.5 classes? At that time, I was giving about 225 questions throughout the semester on my 2 or 3 or 4 exams. The difference between an A and a C was 20 points. If you could get approximately 205 right out of 225, you'd get an A. But if you could only get 185 right, you were in there about a C plus or so with a C. I covered about, if you figure this out, 225 questions in 45 sessions. That's about 5 questions per session, 5 key points. What is the difference between the A and C students' attendance? The difference was 5 or 4.5 minus 1/2 is 4. 4 missing of classes times 5 points is 20 points. The exact difference between an A and a C in that class. It might have been just the difference of sitting in 4 more classes to get an A. What if these 20 methods are only worth 1 point each? If you're running along at about 75%, you'll suddenly have a 95%, which is more than enough for an A average. But many students are doing much better than that. I had one student last semester in my class that came to the seminar just missing getting A's. And I think right now, I'd like you to hear from him for just a moment or two.
A friend of mine had taken the seminar a while back, and I noticed a large improvement in her grades. And I said, well, you know, what is it that's helping you get these better grades? And she told me about these tapes that she had got. And I found for myself, I wanted to get into the honors program here. And I was always getting like 89 average, and I just needed that little extra that's going to help me get the A. And I found that once I listened to the tapes, that I took my average up, and I was able to get into the honors program. And since I took it 3 semesters ago, I've gotten all straight A's, except 1 B.
Another student of mine by the name of Tom Kelly, some years back, took the college entrance exam and scored one of the highest grades in math that had ever been recorded. I asked him how he did it. A very good student, engineering student now, and he told me that he used a couple of simple little techniques. In a letter that I received from him, he said, when I work math or engineering problems, I work backwards. In multiple choice, I start by reading the answers first and try to make up a question. He remembered an essay question he had in an engineering class, and it had to do with the stress of a bridge. How much weight could a bridge take before it would collapse? And explain your answer. And a few figures were given, lengths, etc. And most of the students came up with mathematical answers, but none of them except Tom Kelly came up with the answer that the instructor was looking for. And here's what he came up with. He looked at this bridge from a very practical point of view. What happens to a bridge? He thought to himself, now wait a minute. If you just put the weight on the bridge and start doing your multiplications and formulas, you may not come up with the real life answer. And so in his answer, he said, it depends on whether there's a wind that's moving the bridge. It depends on whether the weight is moving on the bridge like a railroad car, which is jiggling along. And then he gave different suggested answers, and those were the answers the instructor was looking for. So I think maybe we could look at concepts. We could figure out what wind, what causes a bridge to collapse. It's not just dead weight. A doctor back east, reported in the New England Medical Journal, came up with an ingenious way to help many dyslexic people. Parts of the problem that some dyslexics have, there are various problems that some of them have. They're not really problems because most people that have dyslexia simply see something that we don't. They have a wider range of focus, which served them very well before someone invented reading. but they have a problem sometimes in focusing on a word. What do you think he came up with? An elaborate mechanism costing thousands of dollars? An expensive operation? He came up with a simple piece of paper with a hole poked in it. And he had one of his patients who was reading at a third grade level start reading, a middle-aged man, start simply holding the paper over the words and going across the page so that only one word came into view at a time. And now he didn't transpose words. And in less than 4 months, this middle-aged man was reading at the 10th grade level. 7, extra credit. What's extra credit? In my opinion, anything classified as extra credit ought to just be automatically done. I'll give you a couple of reasons. Anyone here take Jazz in America? Oh, we've got, for you people watching or listening on cassettes, this is a popular course here at ASU. Probably half of us will go across the street to Chewy's after this and talk this thing over. It's a little nightclub in downtown Tempe. One of the places that, I'm not sure if they do it anymore, but several years back, that was one of the places that Jazz in America students would go and actually get extra credit. Well, my son went in to check on his grade along with his friend, and his friend missed an A in that course by one single extra credit point. And he asked the instructor, "Can I make it up?" And the instructor said, "I'm sorry, we can't put on a special event just for you." That's what extra credit could mean, the difference between an A and a B. Wouldn't it be a shame to miss out on an A simply because you didn't spend one night out with your friends over at Chewy's listening to music? And yet people do it. My son, in his first year or two, he had an opportunity to get 2 extra credits in an astronomy course. We live over in Scottsdale, 7 miles away from campus. He got up, they had to check on Saturn through a telescope. And Saturn was visible only about 4 in the morning. So he set his alarm and he got up. He went outside and there was a light drizzle and overcast, and you couldn't see any stars in the sky, so he went back up and went to bed. At the end of the semester, he missed getting an A in that physics course by 1 point. He got 249 out of 250. He went in to see the instructor, but the instructor, being a logical, left-brain, analytical, scientific person, would not budge. And he got a B in that course simply because he didn't come down here that night and check in, because the people that checked in got the extra credit. That's what extra credit means. Another friend of mine related a story years back when he was in high school. He was a student of mine, took care of lab mice for his science teacher while the science teacher went skiing over Christmas vacation. And it was really not much of a job because he went past the high school every day with a paper route. He ended up getting extra credit and a better grade. The instructor said, "Well, you've learned something, I'm sure, in the last 2 weeks here, and you're right on the borderline, we're going to give you the credit." He told about asking a math teacher how his transit worked. It's one of those things that you look through, and you can get the corners of property lines. Well, the math teacher was happy to show him how it worked. In fact, took him out on a few sites. Whetted his interest in the construction business, and if any of you have seen the large warehouses with the triple painted sides on them up and down the freeway here and going from Tempe into Phoenix, or maybe the Garrett building, or some of these other buildings around town, those are all owned by Wayne Barnes, former student of mine. So you never know what will happen if you ask questions of instructors.
This concludes Session 2 of Where There's a Will, There's an A. Session 3 will begin in a moment.
Number 8, pre-test yourself. Study exams before you take them. Just as we build files on instructors and courses, we could consider building files on exams. There's nothing unethical about using old exams for studying purposes. In fact, there are instructors that have old exams. Sometimes you can find old exams in the library. Sometimes you'll find them in bookstores. I remember in law school, 25 or 30 years ago, I happened to buy a used book, and there was a quiz in one of those books. And that quiz was given again. Nothing unethical about studying from old exams. You might exchange them with friends. Or one of the best methods of studying exams before you take them is to make them up yourself. As you're actively reading, not passively reading. Passive reading is pretty much a waste of time, just sitting there and reading something over and over again quietly to yourself. There's an awful lot of wasted time there. Active reading is sitting down with a pen or pencil and constantly making up questions and answers and writing them down and practicing for an exam. At an Eastern school, another survey was conducted, and 2 sets of people were surveyed. One set was told to make up exam questions for a period of 3 or 4 weeks and then see what happens. And they were matched up against the other group that was told to continue studying just as they had. The ones that started making up exams beforehand came up with between 75 and 80% of the questions that were on the real exams and scored 10% higher on those tests. A student was in a Mexican history class here at ASU. One day the instructor said, read about the Olmec problem over in Hayden Library. Check the book out. It was 40 or 50 pages in this chapter. Well, everyone went over there and read it. Then they were given a test on it, and the test question was, what is the Olmec problem? Now, the Olmecs are a race that used to live in Mexico. Very few people got the question right. Do you know what the answer to the question was? The problem, as far as anthropologists was concerned, is how did these people make these stone statues? We never found any tools around that they could carve them with. That was the problem. It was in one sentence in that chapter. Had the students simply put a question mark after the chapter heading and made sure that they knew the answer, they could have gotten 100 on that test. Maybe that's the way to study. Put a question after the chapter heading, put a question after every subheading, and make sure you can answer those. Because there's no point in reading something 3 times and not knowing what we've read and get a C on a test. Again, we're simply fooling ourselves if we think that hard work and long hours is going to do it. I have never in my life here at ASU given a grade for hard work or long hours. I don't have that. Have you ever taken a test like that where it says, okay, how much work did you put in, how long did you put in, and then here's your grade? I don't think there's anyone here that's had a test like that. Here's another suggestion. Study in very bright light. Doctors have given patients who are depressed instructions to sit under very bright lights in the morning and in the evening to reduce depression. And if you feel stressful prior to an exam, maybe the thing to do is to help your brain and get bright lights. One of the best ways to do it is to sit next to a window. Here's another way that you can reduce depression. Wear a pleasant perfume or cologne. Why would that have anything to do with it? Well, in this medical journal article, they said that if your spirits are lifted, you're going to do better on tests. You know, a shrewd real estate sales lady tells her client, "Why don't you bake some bread in the oven when we come by for an open house?" The shrewd used car salesman sprays a little new car smell in the car. The first and last minutes of class are sometimes the most important first and last minutes you could spend there. The instructor will quite often cover questions on tests that he maybe made up earlier to avoid arguments later. I've done it myself. I sit down and I make a test up over the weekend, and I get done, and I go into class on Monday, and I forget to cover 1 or 2 points, and so here's what I do. Right at the end of the test, right at the end of the class, when I have this little note to myself, I'll say something like this: "Oh, class, before you leave, the Olmecs in Mexico were such and such." I'm doing it so that on Wednesday, when I give the test, someone doesn't come up to me and say, "Hey, look, we didn't cover Olmecs in class, and you didn't assign it in the library." And of course, it would be horrid if you left a minute early and you found out that you're going to have a test on the Olmecs on Wednesday, wouldn't it? Number 9, expert test taking. How do we become an expert test taker? Did you know that the ACT people admit that there are just so many questions? I mean, how many different variations of a train going 25 miles an hour and a car going 30 miles an hour towards each other can you come up with? Oh, the next time around, let's use a boat and an airplane. Oh, great. What are we going to do next time, though? How about a bicycle and a motorcycle? But you see, the formulas are still the same. In essay questions, contrary to what people might say, volume does pay. Studies indicate that volume pays, and short paragraphs pay off. If you have the same number of words in an essay question in 2 long paragraphs, you'll get slightly less credit than if you break it into about 5 more attractive-looking paragraphs. And neatness really pays. We've talked about our erasable pen. How about fill in the blanks? The answer there is you fill in absolutely everything, even if you have to guess, because you might be right, or you might even get half credit. True, false, multiple choice. Answer every single question. Actually fill it in, even if you don't know. Put a dot in the margin then and then come back. There's nothing worse than having the professor tell you at the end of the hour, "Okay, turn in your exams down. Now you've got a half a dozen here that you wanted to go back to, and now you've just got to put dots or fill in." Stay to the end. People that study hour after hour, they don't want to stay to the end. They've had enough. They want to do it and get out of the place. But there are advantages to stay at the end because the instructor starts explaining things a little bit towards the end. You might even do this. Ask an instructor, "Is this the kind of an answer you're looking for?" Boy, towards the end of the hour when there are a few people left, he may start giving you clues. Now, why is he doing that? Because instructors love to teach. They want to teach you, and it's hard for them to hold back. I've already told you about sitting in the front. You see how much easier it is if you're in the front. And remember this, the difference between an A and a B is quite often only 1 point. I think that if you start doing things, and I'm sure that a lot of you are doing them already, watching things like Jeopardy, where you're just taxing your mind a little bit against bright people, little thought provokers that you find in magazines like the Reader's Digest. They've always got a little quiz in there. They've got something every once in a while. Could you qualify for Mensa, for instance? And they've got these little questions, and boy, you figure those things out. Remember, the muscles in the brain are the only 2 things that you can develop. We got to work on our brain besides our muscles. How many socks, for instance, if you've got red and black socks in your drawer, how many socks do you have to pull out to make sure that you've got a pair with the same color? Anyone? 3. There you go. Do you get psyched out when everyone is writing in an exam? You look up and everyone's writing except you? Don't worry about it. Maybe they're just trying to figure out the directions. They're still writing their names, you see. The first papers turned in my class are consistently poor papers. And yet I don't think that's what the students in my class think. I think that they say, oh boy, I wish I were that bright that I could finish this early. Take a look at the best guesses in your manual. There are, 10 or 15 more. Now, what I'm talking about when I mention guesses, I'm not saying that you guess at something where, of course, where you know what the answer is. I'm talking about eliminating all the answers that you know and then taking educated guesses. And, of course, don't be afraid to use your own system. Even use your fingers if you can get the right math answer, or draw out problems. Some people are reluctant to draw on their question sheets during an exam, but if you can draw something out, sometimes you'll get an answer. And of course, double check your question sheet. Every time I give an exam, I have people that have not checked their answer sheets, and they've messed up someplace, or left true-false answers blank, 3 or 4. I'll tell you another way that you can get sharp. It's real easy. It won't take you any time. When you're in a grocery store, for instance, test yourself. Is a 12-ounce jar of peanut butter at $1.29 a better bargain than a 10-ounce jar at $1? Why is the 5th answer the best, do you think, in a multiple choice test where most of the answers are limited to 4? I'll tell you why. Let's say I'm making up a multiple choice test, A, B, C, and D. I get down to the end of the page, and I start reviewing my test, and I find out that I didn't have a possible answer in one of them. What am I going to do? Retype it all if I have a typewriter? Or am I going to maybe just add a question, or maybe add an answer? The first impressions that come out of the blue are generally the best. Now, why is that? Because that's our right brain in action. Give it a chance. It's coming out of the subconscious. It's been fed all kinds of information that you've read but may not remember, but it's in there. None of us have a bad memory. We simply have trouble sometimes recalling things from our memory. Why does a person change an answer if first impressions are generally correct? I'll give you the answer. It's the same answer that we could give to why a person goes to Las Vegas and keeps putting money in slot machines. It's because every once in a while you win. If you went up there and you never won, you'd quit. But you see, if every once in a while you get the right answer by changing it, now you get hooked on it. You think, oh boy, I better change this. I better take a chance at it. Hilton, when he started his hotel chain, proved that fact, that he called it hunches. Now, there's a difference between a hunch and just gambling. Gambling, you don't have a chance because of information stored in your subconscious. But with a hunch, you do. He had studied the hotel business inside and out. He bid on his first hotel. It was something like $875,000 or something like that. The night that he turned his bid in, he had second thoughts. There was something that was gnawing at him, and he thought to himself, I think that I've got to go a little higher on this or I'm not going to get it. And fortunately, he could change his bid, and he did, and he got the hotel by a few $1,000s. And it started him on the Hilton Hotel round the world business. That was his hunch. So we've got to play our hunches. If they're based on information that we have put into our brain. Do you know what you can do with your brain besides tricking it the wrong direction by sitting in the library and believing that now you're entitled to a good grade simply because you've sat there? You can also trick it in your favor. Take your pen. From now on, I'm going to call it your lucky pen. and start using your lucky pen. If you take a pen and take good notes with it, both in class and back in your room, and now these are correct answers that you're writing with this pen, if you take that pen into an exam schedule with you, you're going to have a slight psychological edge by using your lucky pen. You've got the feel of it. I've got a baseball player in my class this semester. He played in minor leagues for a couple of years. Now he's coming back to school. He said, you know, there's only about 1 out of 1,000 baseball players that get into the major leagues, so here I'm back here. I told him about this, and he said, you wouldn't believe the superstitious people around. I said, are you superstitious? He says, I put my socks on the same way every time I pitch. He said, I use the same T-shirt. It's falling apart, but I wouldn't think of not wearing that same T-shirt when I pitch. If you can get that psychological edge, who cares whether these things are silly or not? If they work, use them. If they don't work, cast them out. Number 10, term papers. One way that you can get good at writing term papers is by reading term papers. Volunteer. A friend has a term paper, volunteer to edit it for him. You'd be surprised how sharp you get when you start looking at a paper very critically and you begin to see what kind of errors other people make. And you'll make friends that way. They'll be obligated to you. They'll help you out. They might furnish you with an old exam sometime to another course. And you get an A instead of a C. People who write the best get the promotions. There was an advertising executive that spoke here in Phoenix some time back, and he said, the people in our company that don't write fuzzy memos are the ones that go to the top. I used to have a pretty much a bell-shaped curve in my class for term papers until I went through a simple little 5 or 10 minute story with my class. I'd get the typical A papers, the B papers, the C's and the D's. And then one day I did something very strange. I began to compare term papers with an order in a restaurant. And I held up in my class a picture of a juicy cheeseburger and a milkshake in a frosty glass with the tin container it was made in right next to it. And I said, I'm going to compare these term papers, and these term papers that I have are the real papers. These aren't something that I made up. These are all dated back in 1983. This one, 83. This one doesn't have a date on it. But let me go through this with you, and I guarantee that your paper grades are going to go up tonight. And all you have to do is just sit and listen. Oh, and do this. Take the position of a restaurant critic. Let's say that you're going to come into my restaurant this evening, and you're going to order a cheeseburger and a milkshake, and you're going to rate it on a scale from maybe 1 to 100 for everything, for appearance, for taste, you name it. And you sit down at the counter and you order the milkshake and cheeseburger, and it comes out, and it is beautiful. It's on a warm plate. It's a fresh bun. Has one of those little flags, little toothpick stuck in it. It's got a little swig of carrot on a plate. It's got a little pickle. It's got a little bit of parsley. The thing looks terrific. And then your milkshake comes. And it's in this tall, frosty glass filled right to the top. And this tin that you can put your initials in on the sides, it's, wow. You take a bite of the cheeseburger, it tastes better than it looked. You sip the milkshake, it's terrific. How do you grade it? Well, let's say that we start with an A+. Here's our first paper. Some of you people are in my business law class. In this first paper, all I told the students to do on this particular little project, it's really not much of a project. I simply asked them to write up a case. Go to the law library, find a case there, brief it, and then define the topic that they had. So there's 2 sections to this. Real simple. I didn't say anything about typing it. Here's the paper. It happens to get an A+. It has a little cover sheet, but so what? It's just a little garnish. Doesn't make much difference to me, I don't think. Oh, but look at this. This person's paper is entitled Formal Contracts Under Seal. That means like a notary seal, or a corporate seal, or a stock certificate with a seal on it. Look at how innovative this person was. Not only does he sign it, but he has it notarized and has a notary put its seal on it and expiration date. Oh, let's compare this to our cheeseburger. You see, I just ordered a cheeseburger. I didn't get all of those little garnish things, but they added to it. The little toothpick even with the little flag on it. There's no smudges on the glass. Have you ever had a milkshake where someone else's lipstick is there? Or a plate that's dirty? This has no smudges. Look, I'm going to hold this up so you people in the front row can see. There's no whiteouts. This thing is perfect. A perfect presentation. Do you have to read the whole thing to make that judgment? I don't know. Do you have to drink a whole bottle of wine if you're a wine tester? Do you have to eat a whole cheeseburger to determine whether it's good or not? You start reading this and you skim through it, and if it looks as good inside as it does on the outside, you can give that person an A. In this case, an A+. Next paper. It's on 1 sheet of paper, single-spaced. Little lipstick here on the glass. No garnish. This is comparable now to our second critic that comes in and sits down and orders a milkshake and a cheeseburger. And out comes this plain cheeseburger with no toothpick with a little flag in it, no pickle, no parsley, little smudges on the glass. Here's the problem. If it were just that cheeseburger milkshake, it might rate an A, in your opinion. But there's the bigger problem, and that is, next to your plain cheeseburger is this terrific one. And now we're beginning to compare. And that's the name of the game. Your papers will be compared to other students' papers. And if yours is the best, you get the A. Now, maybe that's not fair, but that's how life is. Third paper. Let's maybe take a look at the third cheeseburger. The waitress comes over and says, you know, we're out of plates. Do you mind if we just serve it on a paper plate? What do you say? Oh, it's all right. What if someone came into your office and you're teaching and they said, say, I noticed that those are typed out. Do you want yours typed out? Do I have to go home and type this, or will this handwritten one be all right? You know what I'd tell them? No, it's all right. Turn it in. I'm not going to tell someone to go all the way home and type it and come back. Oh, and it comes out, the milkshake is in one of those styrofoam cups, you know. You happen to bite into it, and now you've got styrofoam and milkshake. Well, here's our third paper. I'm holding up one that's got this little bend. Remember this from second grade where you don't have a paper clip, so you bend it and bend it back and forth? Hey, wait, what are you laughing at? Is there anything wrong with doing that? It's efficient. And what is this stuff on the side? It's sort of like wine. But you know, it's sort of a medium quality wine because the paper is medium quality, and this person drinks only medium wines. What do we give him as a, give him a B-. Maybe I was a little generous. Fourth person comes into the restaurant, orders, again, it's you. You're doing a critique on this. And you order a milkshake and a cheeseburger, and they get your order all messed up. And they bring out 3 cheeseburgers and no milkshake. And you wait, and you tell them, and they still don't get it right. What do you give that person? Well, here's a paper like that, paper number 4. 12-page paper, First page is blank. Second page has got our little definition. It's like a little teeny tiny cheeseburger. Well, I didn't order any particular size, so why should I complain about that? Then it goes, oh, here's a page that's upside down. It's kind of like one of the cheeseburgers you get is just upside down, but oh, here's a plate with about 2 items on it. Here's another blank, here's an empty glass, just an empty page. I don't know what's going on here. What do you give that person? Again, we're comparing it with all these other papers. I like this 5th paper. We go into a restaurant. We order this cheeseburger and a milkshake. And we wait, and we wait, and we're getting a little impatient. And finally, some back in the kitchen someplace, someone hollers out, "Who ordered the cheeseburger out there?" And you look around and you say, "Well, I guess that's me." And they say, "Here it is." And they throw it out, and it lands on the floor, and you go over and pick it up, and here is our paper. It's a paper that was photocopied at the law library. I know that because it says so on the side. They didn't bother trimming it. But he did do this. At the bottom he said, "The red marks are the relevant parts." He has an unusual topic. The topic is this. It's an action against a guarantor under a written agreement to lease a liquor license. I think this student might have been under the influence himself. Well, that's how things are. Oh, the waitress comes over when she finds out that you've downgraded her because you gave her a lower mark, and she says, "Hey, wait a minute. That cheeseburger of yours came out of the same grill, the milkshake came out of the same machine. Why do I get a C and this one gets an A?" What? It's on a paper plate, but we ran out of plates. Do you want me to go in there and wash dishes just for you? And you say, no, that's all right. Well, then what is it? Well, you think a minute, and you say, well, I didn't get a little flag in mine. You got to be kidding. So she walks over to the ashtray and picks out a toothpick and jams it into the cheeseburger and says, "Now, can I get a better grade?" What do you tell her? That's what happens to students that walk into professors' offices and say, "Do you mean to say that because I didn't turn this thing in on time, or I didn't type it, or I've got a few little smudges on it, you mean to say that that's why I'm getting a C in this paper? That doesn't seem fair." Besides appearance, we can also improve content. And in the manual, I have a 5-step program for writing quality papers. And it's based on an unusual principle that my brother came up with years ago back at the University of Wisconsin. He taught English there. And here's what he suggests. First of all, you put a little outline down on a piece of paper and just draw it very quickly. Take your topic and then make up about 5 sentences and write those down with arrows pointing around. Then fill in on your paper, leaving maybe 10 or 15 lines vacant, and then fill those sentences in. Those are going to be your topic sentences now. So we're starting at the top of the page and we're writing a topic sentence. Then we go down maybe 2/3 of the way down and write another topic sentence. And we turn it over and do another one and another one. Do you know what you can do now? Instead of starting to write a paper in the old-fashioned lineal method where you start on the first line and you keep going, and you come up with some great idea for later on, but when you get there you forget it. Now what you can do is you can move around on this paper the way an artist does with a canvas, or the way a sculptor does with a piece of stone. You see, a sculptor does not start at the top of the head and gradually work down, nor does an artist. They move all around. That's why they come up with a work of art. And this is how you can come up with a work of art and get an A instead of a B. You can fill in information any way you want. So we've got, first of all, make an outline. Second, make up these topic sentences. Third, fill in any way you want. Jump around. Move around the canvas with a piece of stone. Fourth, then refine the paragraphs. You remember what we said about paragraphs. Don't have real long ones. They don't look aesthetic. And then finally, 5, check for grammar, spelling, repetition. Have someone edit your paper. Read it aloud. See how it sounds. Papers sound differently than they read. When you've done that, you've got yourself an A paper.
This concludes Session 3 of Where There's a Will, There's an A.
Okay, let's take a look at number 11, which is registration tricks. One of the problems with a class that's popular is it's hard to get in. And here are some of the methods of getting in. You know, here at ASU, right after the first of the year, registration closed for several days for the purpose of determining who paid their fees, who had outstanding parking tickets, who hadn't taken their books back to the library, who didn't have the prerequisites, and suddenly registration reopens. If you can't get into a popular class then, you can put some pressure on people to get in, and the most persistent person seems to get in. My entrepreneurship class, for instance, fills up. And yet there are always people that get into that class. So never give up on registration. It's really never closed. And number 12 deals with memory tricks. There's a misconception about our memory that I mentioned earlier, and that is that it might not be as good as someone else's. But our memory is perfect. We'll remember things forever if we can shift their thoughts into the long term. We memorize, let me tell you why I believe that most students feel that they only have limited brain cells. One day I gave a test, and I announced it in class as a test on chapters 4 through 8. I went home and I made up the exam over the weekend, and I got down to the bottom of the page and I had my 50 questions that I wanted, but I hadn't covered chapter 8. Well, I thought, I'll do that on the next test. And when I went in to give the exam, I was passing the exams out, and just as kind of an afterthought, I thought, well, I'll mention that it's only 4 through 7. You know, I got a universal groan throughout the whole room. I said, what's the matter? And one young fellow said, oh, I think I've used my last cell on chapter 8, and now you pull this. Well, there are 3 ways of memorizing things. We can memorize either by the hardest method, which is the rote method. That's just going over and over and over and over a thing until finally a chemical change takes place, which is what happens. Scientists now have discovered that's an actual chemical change that takes place with the cells. If you've got all the time in the world, it's probably a good method. Little kids, age 2 or 3, they can play with blocks with ABCs on for hour upon end because they don't have anything else to do. But once we get to this stage in college, we don't have the time to sit down and memorize everything through the rote system. The next method of memorizing is through the recognition method. Linking one thought to another, for instance. Linking something that we already know with something new. And the third is the relearning method. It's Besant's 4, 5, or 6 separate session methods where you repeat something, you come back maybe 10 minutes later, maybe an hour later, maybe the next day. And he uses an interesting method of linking up words. They're in your manual. The word for one, and let me just draw one on the board here. It's really because I like this chalk. For him, one is a pen. 2 is a swan. I made up one. 3 for birds. You've seen birds flying. 4, a sailboat. 5, a hook. 6 could be a snail. 7, a cliff. 8, an hourglass. And on. 9, a whistle. How would a whistle look? Kind of like that. And 10, what would be a good tie-in for 10? How about a bat and a ball? Do you know how easy it would be to memorize those things? I'm sure that when you leave here today, you could do this in just a matter of moments. Now that you've got something like that tied in, imagine if you'd apply it to unknown facts and make up a little story. And the more ridiculous the story, the easier it will be to remember. Now there's a real shortcut. Or maybe you'd even want to make up your own. Well, I've devised my own system. I had as the number 1, I just used the word 1 to win something. 2 was a pear, 3 was a tree, 4 star, 5 foot, 6 pack, 7 up, 8 to eat something, 9 iron, and tent. Now, if I need to memorize something, I just fit them into a slot. If I were to memorize, for instance, the back of this church bulletin, the first advertiser on this bulletin is a floor covering company. So how do I make up a quick little story so that I can lock it in? Well, my first word for number 1 is to win. So I'm going to win something on this floor, basketball game maybe. The second one is Allstate Insurance. Well, my second word is a pair. I won't ever forget that because a pair of hands represents Allstate. And you see, now I can differentiate between the second one and the other ones on here very easily. The third one is a mortuary with little palm trees in front of it. So I'll remember that, and I'll link up to that with my third number 3 for tree. The fourth one is a car wash. Now, how can you tie in 4 star, remembering that the star is my 4th word? Well, have you ever looked at a car after it came out of a car wash, and if the light is shining on it, you can see this little shiny star in it? Stanley's Plumbing is 5. There's a little man here running, so I got 5 foot. A 6-pack for Aunt Mary's Restaurant. 7 Up, For a cemetery, how do you come up with that one? Well, 7 feet up out of the grave and you'll be out, you see. And remember, when you make it silly, it's easier to remember. 8, how would you tie in the 8th advertiser with the word 8? Well, the 8th advertiser is State Farm. Sure enough, it's State Farm Insurance. You eat farm products. How do I make sure that I don't get it mixed up with the second word that I wanted to memorize, which is Allstate? I can't mix them up anymore. You see, on a test, I know that the second is Allstate with the 2 hands, the pair, and on and on. Well, that helped me tremendously because I always thought I had a poor memory. I didn't have a poor memory. I just had poor recall, and I didn't have a method of doing it. In a trial some years ago, there was a witness that observed a hit-and-run accident. I was representing the plaintiff in that case, and the witness could not remember the license plate of the car. Well, could you? I never expected that the witness even saw it. And yet, under hypnosis, the witness remembered. The witness was calling back out of the memory. We store everything. It's a matter of how do we get it back. I remember going back to Marquette this past year to give a seminar, and it brought back a memory of something that I memorized. Crazy little thing. Fraternity required us to pick out something to memorize. I looked through this little list, and the word that looked easy for me was a blush. You know, your face gets flushed. And, so I said, I'll memorize that. He said, go in the dictionary. He said, oh, no, you have to memorize the medical definition of a blush. I said, oh, what's that? And he gave me this big paragraph. That was back in 1951. So what is that, 61, 71, 81? We're talking about, what, 25 years or more. You know what the medical definition of blush is? It's a temporary erythema and calligraphic effulgence of the physiognomy, aleatized by a perceptiveness of the sensorium due to a sense of shame, anger, or other cause, eventuating in paralysis of the vasomotor muscular filaments of the facial capillaries, whereby being divested of their elasticity becomes suffused in an eminence, radiating in an intimated procardia. Well, why would I remember something like that? It's because I did nothing more than what we all do when we, using the rote method over and over again, memorizing our ABCs. I mean, to a foreigner, that little paragraph that I just rattled off wouldn't sound any better than this little paragraph or two. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. Do you see? Well, let's use our memories the way we can use them. They're valuable. I saw another article, a medical article, in which several doctors and scientists found that sleeping pills reduced recall. So before a test, if you can't get to sleep, try some of the other methods of going to sleep other than using sleeping pills, because if it just cuts 5% away from your recall, that could mean the difference between an A and a B. Number 13, scholarships and jobs. I mentioned $4 billion in scholarships last year were granted from 4,000 sources. But $135 million was never picked up. And I got that unusual letter from our dean's office. It says, a strange thing is happening in our College of Business. We have over 100 scholarships and very few takers. Would you please announce this to all your classes? Can you imagine that? They're giving money away over there and they just can't seem to find the students to take it. I was on a scholarship committee one year and there were only 3 applications. I made a photocopy of the 3. This would have gotten a D, this one would have flunked, and this one got a C-. All poorly written, but the best of the 3 got the cash scholarship. I suggest that if anyone would have typed out a scholarship, all three of these are handwritten. It looks like they were written right at the counter and then just turned in. So there's money to be had. What about jobs and activities? The Educational Testing Center found that students who were active in one or two selective activities were the most successful college students. The people that were active in no outside activities were next, and then the third group of students that were far too active, they were at the low scale. Well, what can you do? In my entrepreneurship class, people ask me, well, how can I make more than $3.25 or $4 an hour? One of the things that we can do is apply the same techniques in our jobs as we do in our courses, and that is get into something that you really like. Forget about the money. The money will flow. Get into something you like. Robert saw some of the old cars that I used to fix up when I was in college. I brought a couple of pictures along. Here's a 63 or 64 Thunderbird convertible that looked like a piece of junk. And with a little paint and a little touching up and a little elbow grease, a little running around town, he turned a $2,200 piece of junk into a $10,500 showpiece. And what a nice way to run around town and go back and forth to school. He did about 4 of those. That's how I did it when I was in college. I've had about 40 cars. I had all the little Porsches. My daughter says, Dad, why'd you sell that little thing? Well, I used the money. Another young lady in my class whose hobby was photography started taking wedding pictures in her spare time. She is now, I saw her just recently, and she is now doing it almost full time. And I said, what kind of an income do you make now? And she said, this year I'll make about $60,000. I said, that's an awful lot of money to make in your spare time. She says, well, it's very profitable. I love my work. Even though she backed into a family pool one day when she was trying to get a picture of the whole family. 14, postcards and phone calls. An interesting possibility for getting that A where you're just on the borderline of getting a B. Let me preface this with what typically happens at most colleges and universities around the United States. The beginning of the semester, the president tells the deans, we've got grade inflation problems. How come all these grade changes are coming in and they're always mathematical errors on the upside? People say that there was an error and that instead of getting a B, you should get an A. The dean has a meeting with his department chairman and tells them the same thing. And the department chairman tell the faculty members, would you please not send in these grade changes? We know what's going on here. Would you please try to keep, particularly in a college of business, we ought to be running this place like a business. Well, okay, we all say fine. Then, of course, 3-4 weeks after the grades come out, we've got these people coming in the office. They want the grade changed because they've missed something here, there, or everywhere. How do you get a grade changed? Rule number 1, get it changed before this poor professor has turned in the grade to the department chairman, who has then turned it into the dean's office, who has turned it into the administration, who turns it over to the registrar's office, who then sends it out. Because in order to change a grade after it's gone through that whole process, I must sign a change of grade form with the reasons. My department chairman then has to back me up. Then it's got to go through the dean's office, then through the administration, then to the registrar. So that's the reason to use a postcard or a phone call or a personal visit before the grade is mailed out. If you have a possible ambiguous question that could go your way, see the instructor first. That lifeguard that got 39 A's and 1 B had he gone in there first, I'm sure that he would have had a lot less trouble. Let's take a look at that Physics 249 that I spoke about earlier. Instead of coming out here at night to look at Saturn and getting 2 points, let's look at something that I did. I went up and down our